Thank you, David. Thank you to the Primary Purpose Group for hosting me. I wish I could be there with you. It's a bit of a tricky weekend. He mentioned the area assembly. I have a daughter who turns 18 on Halloween, and I have a 5 o'clock work shift. So between, work and a couple hours of highway time, coming or going, figured this was the best option. My name is Rainer, and I am an alcoholic. My sobriety date is January 2nd, 2005. My home group is the Midtown group in Wilmington, which meets Monday and Thursday at 7. We're still Zooming, and we would love to see you either at our speaker meeting or our literature study. And of course, hopefully of course, always of course, I have a sponsor who has a sponsor, and I sponsor. I have learned that people in AA have a tendency to speak ahead of their recovery. I am very much a work in progress, and adapting to changing circumstances is always that is my dilemma. So please take me with a grain of salt and know that I fall short daily. But my efforts are consistent, and if I come across sounding better than I am, it is only because I want to share a message of hope. A drunk in his cups is an unlovely creature, and I don't have a whole lot of stomach for myself. But I would like to offer you some qualification. I was always very self-conscious, perhaps conceited. I put those together because I honestly wasn't concerned with what you thought of me. I was concerned with what I thought you thought of me. Between an image obsession and split custody, I developed a very convenient relationship with the truth. I wasn't interested in what was real, only in the convincing portrayal that I could sell. I was a coaster. I preferred to drift, to go downhill. I was scared of achievement, of effort, thinking that it would bring on expectation. So I tried to be marginal. I marginalized myself, and it turned out to be good underpinning for alcoholism. When I was 12, I went to visit my aunt and uncle in Hickory. Not knowing quite what to do with me, they took me to an ABC store and let me pick out a bottle. There had been a small amount of drinking at home, special occasions, Christmas, birthdays, that type of thing, but I had had no particular exposure to alcohol. I remember walking up and down, looking at the marquees of cognacs and whiskeys and vodkas, but of course the one I picked was a bottle of anisette, which is a thick licorice liqueur. My thought process was that I like licorice jelly beans, so maybe I'd like the taste. My aunt and uncle were early to bed, early to rise. They let me take a shot after dinner, and when they went to sleep, I helped myself to several more. Nothing eventful, nothing I can really describe or pinpoint, but I know that there was something in that bottle. When I got back to Durham, some neighborhood friends and I began paying a homeless man on 9th Street to buy us 40s. We would sit on the bridge of train tracks, 9th Street in Maine, with our backs to the railing and our feet extended to the tracks. We would drink, and that was when I found the magic of alcohol, of Bill's feeling that I was a part of life at last. It was the first time I had ever been able to relax around people, where I didn't have a whirlwind between my ears, where there were no questions. We were just some kids cutting up. It was fantastic. I had always had questions about what to do with other people, and I discovered that drinking was the universal answer. But it was an answer with a price. Very quickly, I lost my vision and my self-awareness. I remember going to a party when I was 15, drinking a fifth of vodka, a little bottle of Kahlua, and a cheap bottle of wine. I threw up in several driveways on the way home before my friends eventually rolled me out of the car. My father came out the following morning to get the newspaper, and he found me passed out in the gutter, his 15-year-old son. Of course, it never occurred to me that there was anything other than his pride in his eyes for the grown-up adventure that I had undertaken. Besides, I was too preoccupied with visions of the boasts which I would deliver on Monday at school. My father and mother lived a few blocks away from each other. They divorced when I was 6, with my mother having primary custody. One evening, I had something that I wanted to talk to my dad about. I said I was heading over to ask advice, and she said no. I went to leave anyway, and she took my key. So I went to my room, and I got a bat. I'll just break a window and go anyway. She ended up trying to take the bat away from me, and I ended up throwing her through a wall. And from that day forward, she was Martha, if she was lucky enough to get 6 letters. But it never occurred to me that my actions had an impact on other people. I ended up finishing high school on a plea bargain. There are these pesky truancy laws in North Carolina, and I had missed more than half of the first semester of my senior year. No problem to me. I had plans to drop out, bag groceries. I was going to make something of myself. But my parents had different ideas, as did my high school principal, whom I have since reunited with in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. He gave me a plea bargain, which allowed me to have the grades that I had earned, provided that I attended sufficiently class during the second semester of my senior year. My grades were good enough to allow me to enroll at UNC Asheville. I had never had a whole lot of oversight at home, particularly with my father, which of course was why I preferred to be with my father. My mother was entirely too interested in parenting. But if there was a time where my drinking really took off, it was with the move to Asheville, when I was under my own roof. And so the first week of college, the dorm monitor finds me naked and bleeding from the head in the shared bathroom after one too many beakers of moonshine. I continued all of my truancy habits because booze is just more interesting than education. I routinely skipped my finals with a self-congratulating sense of nobility that I was there for an education and not for a degree. The school would threaten to expel me for a lack of progress, and I would appeal, spend a semester or so on the dean's list, and then it was time to rinse and repeat. Drinking was my connection to life. It was just too exciting to give up. But it also started getting complicated. I had a job working dorm security. I spent my shift from 10 to 2 drinking vodka with the co-ed before returning to my house downtown. My roommate Ryan was on the porch with a beer, and he asked if I wanted to go to the Moonshine Bar in Tennessee. It wasn't really a bar, it was really just somebody's garage, but that's what we called it. So we hopped in my car and we started heading west. A train was crossing Hendersonville Road, and Ryan asked if I wanted to hop it. Well, I've never hopped a train, but I like adventures, so I said absolutely, and we pulled off in the Pizza Hut parking lot and we hopped the train. Only Ryan did this thing where he hopped on, he hopped off, and he went back to the car. But I was in adventure mode. I thought we were going to see where we ended up. So I crawl hand over hand down the side of several train cars, and I don't see Ryan. But I'm starting to get bored and I'm starting to get thirsty when I realize that I have no idea how to get off a 30-mile-an-hour freight. So looking over my shoulder, I see these large pine trees 2-3 feet away from the train, and I have just enough alcoholic sense to know that I don't want to jump face first into any of those. So, solution, I'll climb on top of the train. And when there's a break in the trees, I make my big Hollywood action debut and I jump off. But there are no trees because we're on an overpass over Highway 74. I land on my feet, smash my knees, crack my head. At first I think it's raining, and then I realize that it's red. I take a few minutes, I gather myself, I see the mile marker sign, and I realize that my girlfriend lives about a mile from there. So 3 o'clock in the morning, I'll just walk to her house and she'll sort it out. I got picked up by the cops for walking bloody down the side of the road. They insisted on calling an ambulance for me, although I ended up refusing the medical attention. Vodka would fix me up better than stitches. And the rail company agreed not to press charges once they were convinced that I wouldn't sue them for my own stupidity. So I never had any real consequences, but I kept finding my way into these little dust-ups. Several months later, for instance, I went to Durham and I bought a new car. I started driving west back to Asheville, still drunk and unslept from the night before. And I came out of a blackout in between Winston-Salem and Statesville, driving down the medium in the pouring rain. I panicked, jerked the wheel, and spun out, ended up totaling the car against a guardrail, but I was loose and I was unhurt. So I pushed the car across 3 lanes to the right shoulder and I called AAA. 30 seconds before the wrecker arrived, a state trooper pulled up and he gave me a ticket for improperly crossing lanes. The insurance company covered the cost of the guardrail, so the ticket was dropped and I just continued blindly forward. But this was the type of event that happened when I went out to drink, when I was looking for adventure. And there were financial realities which were starting to shrink my world. Things were getting very small. I was asking myself these questions. Why should I go out to drink, to have an adventure, when I can drink more and more cheaply at home? And so in the happiest days of my active alcoholism, I think they were the happiest, I lived by myself in a 4-bedroom, 2-bath house. The water was on. It was in the landlord's name, but the water heater was electric and I refused to pay a deposit. There was oil in the furnace, but the pump and the blower were electric. And again, that deposit, that's drinking money. And so in the mountains, December and January, I lived in a large house with a single chair and a candle holder I had made from a tall boy. I sat and I drank the way that I wanted to drink, without interruption, without intrusion. Didn't have a phone, nobody called, nobody came by, it was just me and the bottle. Economic pressures forced me to take on roommates, and so I found some similar drinkers. But I took advantage of my night job to smuggle my empty bottles away from the home recycling. And I withdrew to drink alone in my room, coming down when the house was empty to drink in the living room and congratulate myself for how normal I was. But this was always for an ear in the car, with an ear for a car in the drive or a key in the door, so that I could turn off the lights, scamper upstairs, and pretend that I wasn't there. And even in the congratulatory moments, I would obsess over what was wrong with me. Then in 2004, I met a woman who I thought was my answer and cure. I asked her to marry me, to which she responded that she thought we should date for more than a week before I asked her that. I began to experiment with control. I got really neurotic about my drinking, concerned about who was around and what had happened and what was going to happen and what was next. I knew that I needed to drink, but I knew that I couldn't let her see me drink. So I tried to make sure that if she saw me drunk at all, I was at least halfway under control. Management. And I found that my happiness in these days, when I was wooing this woman hoping to wed, were the days when I wouldn't need to see her, so that I could really uncork and drink the way that I wanted. On New Year's 2005, she came by with the nerve, uninvited and unannounced. I was plastered, of course, and she just looked down at me and said that I was drinking myself to death and she couldn't be a part of it. So I summoned myself, all of my 24-year-old emotional maturity, ran down the hallway and locked myself in the bathroom. She followed. She was apologizing. And then she said that she hadn't meant to hurt me. She was just worried. She didn't mean it. And when she said that, there was something in me that snapped, and I went to shut her up. I knew that what she had said was right, and I could not tolerate the idea of her trying to take that back. I never laid a hand on her, but I can still hear the sound that the door made as the hinges broke, and I can still see the look on her face. And there was something in that moment that brought me face to face with myself, an unlovely drunk. I collapsed and she left. My sobriety started with an understanding that drinking was not an option, that drinking could not be an option. As an understanding that I could not drink, but that absent of guidance and strength, not drinking was not an option. As we say, I had lost the ability of choice in drink. For years, I had convinced myself that I had choice, but it was only the choice between vodka and tequila, between whiskey and beer. There was never a choice not to drink. I had gotten to a place where nothing mattered, where it didn't matter if I laughed again, if I ever had fun again on a Friday night. The only thing that mattered was that I wasn't drinking and that I wasn't treating people as I had been. Somehow I knew that if I was going to stop drinking, I would need to be around people who were not drinking. And so I reached out to the one person I knew who didn't drink. That was my little sister, 19 years old and a year sober in Alcoholics Anonymous. I asked her to help me find a meeting, and she proceeded to type out the entirety of the District 70 schedule. Later that evening, I walked into the Serenity service on Haywood Road in West Asheville and attended my first meeting. I introduced myself as an alcoholic, told them I had no idea what AA did, but that I needed help. And I have no idea what they said in response, but I must have heard something, because I went back. I also feel like I got really lucky with that first meeting because it was me and 3 guys. And I like to joke around and say if there was a fourth person there, I think I would have turned around and left. I don't know that that's actually the case. I was really desperate, but I was scared of people and I wanted nothing to do with you. I just knew that I needed you. I fell into the habit of meetings quickly. I had nowhere else to go. I had nothing else to do. I would go to the noon meeting and hang out until the 5:30, then hang out until the 8 o'clock before eventually going home. This was in Serenity Services, a clubhouse. They had 3 or 4 meetings a day, 7 days a week. I took to AA slowly because I didn't want anything to do with you people. I knew that I needed you, but I was too broken and scared to do anything about it. All I could do was show up, stare down at the table, and gradually start recognizing people by their shoes. There's a guy, I don't know which one, but he writes one of the appendixes, Medical View on AA or something like that, Harry Tybo. And I found a talk of his a few years ago, and he said a line which stuck with me. He said that the alcoholic ego has amazing recuperative powers. And it wasn't long before mine came crawling back. I knew that I wouldn't stay if I didn't do something to justify my presence. I've always been one of these people where needing something wasn't reason enough to do it or to have it. I felt like I needed more of a purpose to belong, to fit in, and to justify being there. And so I started making these resolutions to myself. I made a resolution that I was going to read something at every meeting that I attended. A resolution that I was going to share something at every meeting. And so I was the guy a week and a half sober, struggling to recite how it works instead of just reading the words. I was the guy 2 weeks sober, theorizing about what I thought a 4th step would be like, despite never having had a direct conversation with another alcoholic about sobriety. And bless those people for their tolerance and patience. And thank you, God, for turning those defects to good purpose. I was almost 60 days sober when I started to turn a corner. People at the meeting were talking about how they used the daily reflections in their morning meditation to help them start their day on a good footing. I became convinced that I needed a copy of that book on that day at that meeting, or I was going to drink and die. So I fidgeted my way through the meeting, and I rushed up to the chairman afterwards and frantically told him that I needed one of those books. He looked at me, answered very, very slowly, pissed me off. He said, "Well, we have a literature cabinet in the back. Go get one and bring it to me. You can buy it at cost." So I ran to the back, I threw open the cabinet doors, and I was confronted with nothing but dust and cobwebs. In my panic, I ran back and shouted out that it's empty. What now? And he looks at me, same slow, stupid and slow, and he says, "Well, it looks like we need a literature coordinator. How about you?" And so later on that afternoon, I walk out of the District 70 office on Woodfin Place with $120 of AA literature given to me on my own recognizance and in trust that I would take it back to my group. And miracles started to happen when I paid for my copy of the Daily Reflections rather than skimming it off the top. I got a little puffed up about having a title, about being given a key to the building so that I could stock literature. I even made my first AA friend when Boston Rick made an announcement of asking for help to move a 72-inch TV. And I started to get involved a little, showing up early to set up the chairs, to make the coffee. And I did that on a Thursday night, got it all set, sat down to wait for the meeting. And 3 minutes before the meeting was supposed to start, I finally hear the bell on the door. They had a little bell up top. I look up and a guy sticks his head in, takes off his headphones, and asks if there's a meeting. His name is Marshall. He's been in town for 3 days, sober for 2. And I start to panic because I have no idea what to do with this guy. As a literature coordinator, I feel like I should know, but I know that I don't. So my eyes become pinballs between Marshall and the door and the clock and the door and Marshall and the door and Marshall and the clock. And I'm waiting for Brad or Harvey or Steve or somebody who knows what to do with this guy. He goes quietly back to his music, and 10 minutes after the meeting should have started, a guy named Colin shows up. He's been sober for 10 days, and I ended up chairing my first meeting. I'm only taking you through all of that because I didn't come here so that I could care about others. I didn't come here to give back or to do service. I came here in desperation to find what you could do for me. And what you did was give me a way of life which is infinitely more meaningful as time goes by. Those early terrifying rooms of strangely sober alcoholics became my rooms. You were here when I got here, but I still got to see a fellowship grow around me. You people became Kenneths and Roberts and Elizabeths and Bills. You gave me a program of action and the patient acceptance that I needed while I convalesced. And you gave me a God of my own understanding who can even use my defects to good purpose. I was in AA for several months before I got one of those blue books. And it was several more months before I started using it. But I found a line that really grabbed me. I was raised in the literature. I love it. It's a lot of how I think. And the line is he not a victim of the delusion that he can wrest happiness and satisfaction from life if only he manages well? This was me in sobriety. I picked my first sponsor because he had the most time in the room. Surely if I pick the perfect sponsor, then I'll make it. I was attending 3 or 4 meetings a day because surely if I attend enough meetings, then I'll make it. If I write a thorough enough 4th step, if I share at every meeting, then somehow I will wrest sobriety from God's hands and be secure. So I was a cement head, 9 months sober, unemployed, sleeping in my car, which was fueled by the gas donations from the people I was picking up for meetings, eating off of the charity of members at the meeting after the meeting, and patting myself on the back for what a good job I was doing keeping myself sober. I was doing it all wrong, but I was doing it. To use the words that I most resented in early sobriety, I was exactly where I was supposed to be. And I stayed crazy like that until I was ready for something more. I moved to Wilmington about 9 months sober because the changing season didn't suit life in my car. I rented a couch for a week and I found work, but I was still very much who I was. I sulked because the job I had was beneath me. I avoided people at meetings because I was there by circumstance and necessity. But I persisted, and a few days later, God led me to the man who saved my life. I have heard that the first 3 steps are the emergency room of Alcoholics Anonymous. My first 9 months saved my life. They stabilized me in the fellowship to the point that I could handle the operating room and the work which would make my life worth living. It started with going line by line and page by page through the big book with my sponsor. I thought I was reasonably intelligent. After all, I knew what the words meant. And I thought that somehow that meant that I could understand the book. But I needed Bill to translate it for me, to help me see how I was on every page, to see how the book's directions were designed for a living. And I needed his direct example and contact. My greatest fear has always been being seen and being known. And Bill helped me move past that, to make the choice between an ugly alcoholic death and the acceptance of spiritual help. I think the crux of what Bill did for me was taking the ideas of our program and turning them into real, tangible, and living things. Our steps and traditions went from being wall hangings and opening readings to living pieces of my life. Our literature went from being words on a page to being the roadmap of my thoughts. We are restless, irritable, and discontented unless we can again experience the sense of ease and comfort which comes with a few drinks. Well, it wasn't the drinks that I missed. It was that sense of ease and comfort. And when I finally got a sense of ease and comfort after sincerely trying to help someone with no gaining motive, Bill was there to explain what had happened. I had an early amends experience, which sort of paved the way for the second half of my journey through the steps. And it was as a recipient. I sat down with somebody who wanted to make amends to me, and for 45 minutes they poured through this history of I did this to you, and I did this to you, and I did this to you, and how do you feel? Well, I felt like I was bruised and beaten up. And so when I started approaching the idea of making my own amends, Bill said I should start with my mother. There was no one who I had hurt more or more deliberately. So he took me back to my fifth step in the exact nature of my wrongs. Now, I'm not a Bible guy, but there was a thou shalt, which I simply didn't follow. My amends didn't need to get into detail. They were a failure of a son to honor and respect his mother. My mother simply wished to raise me, and my self-will had convinced me that I was better off raising myself. And so Bill gave me the rule that I must be hard on myself but easy on others. I offered her some specifics of wrongdoing, but since I was trying to avoid further damage, I stayed within the principle of how I had been wrong. I let go of all of my ammunition. I emptied the war chest of the things which I would so often bring up when frustrated about not getting my way. God, I was so petty. And I demonstrated a new attitude by putting her comfort before my own. Letting go of any presumption about her response, I asked her for permission to call her mom. She said yes, hopefully, of course. And as we discussed further what else I could do, she asked me to take her camping. And so I had this reunion with my mom, and for 7 years, Saturday morning at 10 o'clock, that was Mother's Day. We had weekly phone calls. She was under no obligation to be available, but rain, sleet, snow, shine, I was there. Well, the amends had gone so well that I decided to go ahead and make amends to my father. He and I had always been close, and when I told him about the type of son that I hoped to be, he simply replied, "We'll see." And I was completely okay with that because the amend wasn't about an amends episode. It was about taking on a new footing and a new attitude. Another part of the big book came to life with the frame of reference in that experience. I had made my demonstration. It was water under the bridge. Everything worth doing is worth doing poorly. As an active alcoholic, I hid my drinking and indulgence lest an attempt or an endeavor be a failure. Now, as a sober alcoholic, I'll happily fail if it's in the pursuit of my principles. Throughout my sobriety, I have been misguided by motivation. When my sponsor gave me permission to start raising my hand as someone who can sponsor, I had no care to help. I had no interest in another person's welfare. I cared about the recognition that I would surely get as I raised my hand. When I started out in corrections, I didn't care about the group or its members. I cared about being able to announce at a meeting that we needed volunteers, and if anyone was interested, they should come and talk to me after the meeting. All of my ideas have always been backwards. But one of my AA heroes said that if you're wondering whether you're ready to start giving back, ask yourself if it's important to you that other people know that you're giving back. And if it is important to you that they know, then you're not ready to do it. But that doesn't mean that you ought not be doing it. I wasn't ready to be doing the things that I was doing, but I became ready in that process. As an active alcoholic, I tended to sit sideline and criticize the efforts of others. I was often too scared to make my own attempt and to risk the ridicule that I placed on others. I felt that I was waiting to be ready, waiting for a time when success would be guaranteed, but waiting doesn't make a person ready. I have had to learn some of the same lessons a lot of times. When I first started doing corrections, the member who was going to fill me in and show me the ropes didn't show up. And so I was sitting in the VR trailer as these inmates, these convicts, these criminals started filing in. And it was just like with Marshall and Colin when I chaired my first meeting. I started to have this panicky feeling like I didn't know what to do with them. But the answer, of course, was just to show up as a sober member. There were guys at this prison who had been sober for decades, who had gone through the process of registering their group with GSO 11 years earlier. They knew what to do. I didn't have to have answers for them. I simply needed to be willing to walk hand in hand on a path of spiritual progress. And so our common welfare became less an idea and more of a reality. At work, I caught a homeless man stealing fake crab salad from the deli. My company sent me to court to press charges against him. When it was time for our case, I learned that he had been placed in a pretrial program and was 30 days sober living in a halfway house. So I went to the assistant DA and I asked what our options were. We settled on deferred prosecution, which prevented active punishment as long as he stayed out of trouble. And our concept of the right of decision stopped being just number 3 on an assembly reading. It became a living experience. And those are the moments in AA that I love. The moments when our principles, when the words of our book and the words of my sponsor rise up and become living things. When I told my sponsor the one thing that I would never share with anyone, and honesty went from being an idea to being a practice. When I went to the Jekyll Island retreat in Georgia, and I looked at the speaker lineup and I asked my friend Mike why it said AFG after one of the speakers' names. And he explained that was Al-Anon family groups, that she was our Al-Anon speaker. Okay, fine. Never mind that I have alcoholic siblings, alcoholic grandparents, and all of you. I'm an alcoholic. I'm here for the AA speakers. That sounds like a fine time to go sit on the beach. But I went and listened to her talk, and it was the highlight of the weekend. And open-mindedness became a real thing. And I realized that I don't want to pick and choose my teachers, because the best seeds of wisdom and truth often come to me from unexpected sources. As I said, I wanted to hide out in AA, to be sober and secure. But what a gift it's been to have a life in which to practice our principles. I remember telling my sponsor once that I had an alcoholic capacity for double standards. He calmly responded, "Oh, you mean you're a hypocrite?" When I was drinking, I had made plans to meet a friend at a bar. He never showed up, but I got good and drunk anyway. A few days later, I ran into him and demanded to know where the F you were. He said that his grandmother had passed and he was at her funeral. I told him I didn't care. If he wasn't going to show, he should have called me. Now, I've always believed that people deserve to be treated with respect. I was raised well, especially given the challenges that I placed upon my parents. But all of my virtue was in belief. There was no ability to act on any of it. It was all lip service that gave way to convenience. I lacked anchorage to anything of lasting value. And so that's why I'm so taken with AA as a program of action and as a way of life. There's a daily reflections, I think it's in February. It's by a guy named Hal M. from DC. And he says in there that AA isn't something I join, it's something I live. And in A Member's Eye View, this is one of my favorite pieces from AA literature. It says, roughly, that there comes a time in every alcoholic's life, whether in AA or not, when he must sit down at the table with his enemies. When he does, he will be shocked to realize that he is at a table of one, himself. And that, I believe, is when AA becomes what I think its founders meant it to be, a journey into reality. Might be a little rough. I haven't been able to find a copy of that pamphlet in a while, but you get the idea. So I've never talked about my disease, because the way I see it, I am my disease. I am alcoholism. I am selfishness. I am resentment. That's who I am. But if I live life outside of my skull, if I can step away from my feelings, then I can begin to see and hear God. And those things happen in struggle. They happen in challenge. You know, pain is always the touchstone of spiritual progress. I was 5 years sober when I met my wife. I knew that she had a past like I had a past. But a year and a half later, on my 7th anniversary, she told me that she had been shooting heroin for the past month. Later that day, I walked in my home group to pick up my medallion, and of course they asked me how I had done it. And I told them that I had a daily reprieve contingent upon the maintenance of my spiritual condition, and that on that day I didn't even have a spiritual condition. But what I did have were habits of maintenance and things that I did regardless of how I felt or what was happening. And those are the actions which have saved my sobriety and saved my life. Those are the things that allowed me to reach out to a sponsor when I came to a time where I had no effective mental defense against the drink. In the book, it says that to the extent that we do as God would have us do, does he enable us to match calamity with serenity. I don't know if I've done any of that, but the last number of years have been rough. 2012, we left Wilmington. We moved to Durham. My little sister was having twins, and I wanted to be around for that. My wife needed to get away from some people here. Then her grandmother was in failing health, so we left Durham and we moved to Goldsboro, to LaGrange, to Goldsboro, and then back in Wilmington just a little before COVID. And it's been touch and go. It's been a challenge. But I think the reason why I've been able to persevere and maintain some semblance of sanity in spite of the things that have happened is because of habit. It's because of maintenance. It's because of spiritual practice, even when I'm absent of spiritual belief. And it's because of service. Because the way I see it, if selfishness and self-centeredness are the root of my trouble, if I lack the ability to form a genuine partnership with another human being, then my solution lies within the words that as an ex-problem drinker, our very lives depend upon our constant thought of others and how we can help meet their needs. I'm a service guy. To me, service is a secret, and if there's something that I can do for somebody, that's time that I don't have to spend worrying about myself. That's where I got my first taste of freedom from the mental obsession of what's wrong with me, of trying to figure out some way to game the system and figure out how to get for myself the things that I want. That's when I can quiet down my head and let God do his work in my life instead of trying to do his job for him. I came in alcohol desperate, wondering what you could do for me. But I've stayed because I found purpose in trying to be helpful. I always wanted to be comfortable and to feel secure, but I've learned that there's nothing good that ever happens from a comfortable place. The only things that I'm comfortable with are the things from the past. There's no more growth there for me within those comfortable things. So I try to look outside of my comfort zone. The literature says that we are to be happy, respected, and useful once more. I like the idea of being useful, but the idea of being happy, of being respected, to me, those are terrifying. And I'm not entirely sure why. I think some of it is just old hangover ideas of deserving happiness. But I have issue with those. So that's something that I need to look at. When there's something that I'm looking at, something that I'm reading, something that I'm hearing in a meeting that makes me uncomfortable, that's the challenge. When I have, a little twinge of conscience, when God is nudging me in an internal direction, that's a call to attention. I've noticed in the past that I have a tendency to just sort of ramble and lose myself with some of this stuff. So I hope I haven't been pretentious in terms of sharing my ideas. Some of the ways that I look at my sobriety, I didn't mean to get off track if I did. But I do want to say one more thing, sort of as a closing thought. This is something that I heard from somebody in an assembly, and I've really tried to take as a part of my sobriety. It's helped me a lot with the thoughts of selfishness. And it comes from page 164 in the Big Book. And it says, basically, see to it that your relationship with him is correct, and great events will come to pass, both in your life and the lives of countless others. Now, I'm a driver, and I've always thought that if there's anything good that's going to happen to me, I'm going to have to make it happen. And so I had looked at that line as a mandate, to monitor my relationship with God so that I could have everything that I wanted. It was all agency. But I figured out that the reality of these words is that I'm just one of the countless others, given great events in my life because my sponsor and his sponsor saw to it that their relationship with God is correct. And if I acknowledge that, and I most certainly do, how can I without also acknowledging that there is a burden in it? That AA is something you can only keep by giving it away. So, for years of service, I was pretty singular and devoted with these thoughts of what can I do, what more can I do? And I'm trying to be done with that. I'm trying to lose interest in that. I love the things that I've done. I love doing the things that I've done, doing service. But I've benefited. I've reaped the reward, and I'm really trying in a conscious way to shift my focus to encouraging other people to have those same opportunities. Because I believe that AA is a transformative process. But you transform through the process. You know, it's that same Keith Lewis line, you know, just because you're not ready doesn't mean you ought not be doing it. I hope somebody got something from that. It was really nice to see a couple of friendly faces at the beginning flashing around. And if I should be lucky and stay sober, I'd love to come and visit you all sometime down the road in person. Thank you for having me.